I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 53. Today in the show, we're joined by Dr. Jim Brauker, and we're talking about extreme deer habitat improvements. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. It is a beautiful day here in Michigan, and hopefully it is where you're at today as well. That said, I'm feeling a little lonely here as I'm actually without my trusty co-host, Dan Johnson. But it's not all bad news, as Dan's missing the podcast today because his wife just gave birth to their son a few days ago. Yep, it finally happened. And the little guy is healthy, has a full head of hair, and despite what Dan promised me, he didn't name him Dallas Fort Worth Jr. So I know I'm disappointed as well, but nonetheless, Dan ought to be back on the show in a couple weeks. But it's not just me on the show today, as we have a great guest joining us, and that guest is Dr. Jim Brauker. Now, I can't remember where I first heard about Jim, but it could have been in any number of places, really. He's been blogging and producing videos about deer habitat improvements on his website for some time. He's been very active with the Quality Deer Management Association. He's been a speaker and presenter at various whitetail and management-related events, and most recently, he actually released his own book called Extreme Deer Habitat. And last year, I finally got to meet him when I attended a QDMA event at his hunting property, where he actually gave us all a tour of his property and all the different improvements that he'd made for deer. And needless to say, I was pretty darn impressed. And ever since then, I've wanted to get him on the show to share his habitat expertise with all of you. And finally, now, it's happening. So, that said, we're going to dive deep into the habitat improvement projects that Jim has used to transform his Michigan hunting property into really a deer hunting mecca. And we'll discuss all the different tactics that you can use too on your very own properties. Now, quickly though, before we start, I have to apologize in advance for some poor audio quality on this episode. My phone connection with Jim was just a little shaky, so at times you might hear some interference. But nonetheless, I know what Jim has to offer in the way of whitetail wisdom is well worth a strained ear. So, without further ado, let's get Jim on the line. All right, with us on the line now is Jim Brauker. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Hi, Mark. How you doing?
Doing very well. As you know, I was sick the past couple days, so today it's a much better world. I can sit here in comfort again and not feel like I'm about to keel over dead. So it's a good day.
Well, good. I have to tell you, you may hear me coughing a little bit. I've got a little bit of a dry throat, so.
No problem. I think it's going around these days.
Yeah, I've had cough for a few days now.
Yeah, that's no fun. Well, just before I got you on the line, I gave our listeners a kind of a brief introduction into who you are and how I heard about you. But, for those that aren't familiar, can you give us a little bit of background into what it is you do today and how you got into this world of whitetail habitat improvement?
Well, I was a deer hunter for ever since I was a teenager. I'm 65 years old now. And I was part of the Orange Army, really, for most of those years. I bow hunted a little bit when I was young, but really most of my hunting, because I got my PhD at Michigan State University in 1986, and after that I lived out of state. I lived in California, I lived in Illinois, I lived in Arizona, and then I lived back in California again. And hunting for me was really a family experience. I would fly back home like November 14th, get together with the family. The next morning we'd be out there sitting on a bucket, or when they began to allow you to hunt from trees, we built these big wooden tree stands in the trees, and we'd sit out there. And so that was really my hunting experience for 30 to 40 years. And it really wasn't until I retired in 2006. I retired as a biomedical scientist. I was living in San Diego. I moved back to Michigan, and I bought some property. And it was around then that I was first introduced to the idea of quality deer management. It all started, we were just a typical Michigan farm family hunting situation. For all those years, for all those decades, if I saw a buck with legal antlers, I was shooting. That was it. That was the situation for the whole family, and that was the situation for most of the people around this neighborhood here that I live in now near Addison, Michigan. And one day we had a wounded buck that we were following, and I walked up on neighbor's property line. I was pacing back and forth, and this guy came out. His name was Eric, and I've known Eric for quite a few years now, but at that time he seemed like a really strange character to me, because he came over and said, you really can't track that deer in my property. You can go across this field here, but if he goes in the sanctuary, you're going to have to wait until after dark. And I said, what's a sanctuary? And I'll tell you, Mark, I was completely ignorant about all this QDM stuff up until the time I was 55 or 56. And I knew I wanted to get into deer hunting and in a serious way, but I didn't know where to go. And Eric was the guy that kind of started me on my pathway to understanding that there was a different way to deer hunt. We talked, and we ended up tracking that deer on his property, and it came back out. But over the next 2 weeks, Eric and I had several conversations over the phone when he was telling me this stuff, that he was trying to grow bucks on his property, and he was trying to, only shoot mature deer, and he was letting the young deer go, and I had no idea what he was talking about. And I even told him, I don't think you're going to be able to do that as long as you have neighbors like us, because we're going to shoot the first thing we see.
Right.
And I later learned, a couple of years later, that I made him so depressed that he thought about selling his property and moving to Iowa or somewhere and buying property there. But really, it was the other way around. I didn't convince him that he couldn't be successful. He started me on a pathway to being successful myself and changing the way I thought about deer hunting. And really the next step in that, moving from an Orange Army guy to a deer habitat guy, was meeting my friend Jake Illinger at the party for, I think it was my wife and his 30th anniversary high school graduation, and we were standing in a bar at Manitow Inn down the road here, and I met him, and he invited me over to his property, and he showed me his logbook from the prior year. And my experience, Mark, up until then was we would deer hunt, and if we were going to see a buck, it was probably going to be on opening morning in the first 2 hours, and after that, it was going to be hard to see a buck, because we walked back there on the property and we ruined our deer hunting with poor scent control, poor stand approach. We'd hunt the same stands day after day after day, and we just ruined our hunting. And Jake invited me over to his property, gave me a property tour, and I saw his logbook from the year before, and he had passed 7 bucks on opening morning, November 15th, the year before. And it hit me like a diamond bullet in the forehead that it wasn't a problem seeing deer in my neighborhood. He was only a mile as the crow flies from my house. The problem was with me, and I was ruining my deer hunting. And that started me on a journey. And I published a book this year called Extreme Deer Habitat, How to Shape Your Deer Property with a Chainsaw. And that journey was 7 years, learning everything I possibly could about deer hunting from everybody I could possibly think of to learn it. I drove out and visited Grant Wood's property. I took Tony LaPratte's class. I took the deer steward classes. I worked with Jake and other guys like Mike Hartges and learned and learned and learned. And so I come at this deer hunting thing in writing my book not as a expert deer hunter. I am not an expert deer hunter. What I am is an average guy who figured out how to deer hunt. And I'm teaching other people that if I can do it, anybody can. And I've been very successful the last few years with my deer hunting, but it's only because I changed everything about what I did and how I approached deer hunting on my small properties. And so I come to this deer hunting world not as an expert deer hunter, but as kind of a journalist or a scholar who decided after I got done, I approached it this just as I did any other project that I had in my scientific career. I approached it as a project. I was going to learn this. I was going to figure it out. And then I was, really didn't know in the beginning, but I ended up then teaching other people that if I can do it, they can. And so that's kind of where I'm at today. I've written my book, and I'm trying to help other hunters to have the kind of experience that I'm having today.
That's awesome. I think that's an inspiring story for a lot of people who probably were in very similar situations to your own. I mean, I grew up in a similar situation to that with the Orange Army and just kind of shooting the first thing you saw. And, just by diving in, head first and learning everything you possibly could, you've been able to change your situation. And I think that's something that so many other people need to hear and remember that you don't need to be born into deer hunting royalty or, be in a perfect situation with thousands of acres of property or know everything. You just need to try hard, learn a lot, and give it your best shot, and you can, have that
That's
success.
correct. You can have a much better quality, anybody can have a much better quality deer hunting experience, even on a very small property. Most of the things that go wrong with deer hunting, where people go out there and sit all day and don't see anything, in most situations, they've created that.
Yeah. So
poor scent control, poor stand approach, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So there's about a million things I want to dive into that you've already touched on here. But I think I want to start at the very beginning with something you mentioned, being the book you recently released earlier this year. I think it was Extreme Deer Habitat.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by that, extreme deer habitat? What does that mean?
Well, the reason I named the book Extreme Deer Habitat is because that's what I'm practicing. I'm practicing something different than most QDM practitioners practice. The problem that I see when if you want to optimize your deer hunting, you don't want to listen or follow the principles that are usually talked about in quality deer management. And I'm not talking all of the principles, but some of the principles. And the reason is that people tend to, when they start out getting into QDM, and let's say they've got a 40-acre property and it has a 10-acre woodlot on it, they get on the QDMA forums and they say, oh, I got my little slice of heaven, what do I do with it now? And you'll have 10 guys come up and say, well, you need to hire a forester. And if you hire a forester, what he's going to teach you how to do is grow trees. And as long as you're growing trees, those leaves are more than 4 feet off the ground, you're being suboptimal for deer habitat. So extreme deer habitat means that you've decided that you bought your property mainly for deer hunting. That doesn't mean you're not going to use it for a dozen other things. And it doesn't mean you're not going to grow some timber on it. But it means you've thought through what's most important to you about your property. So if I have a 40-acre property and it has a 10-acre woods on it, I'm not going to manage that woods to grow trees and harvest them every 20 or 30 years. I'm going to grow it. I'm going to manage it so that I can harvest a deer that's in the upper 10% of the deer on the property every year. And I'm going to manage it very much differently than I would if I'm doing timber stand improvement and timber management. So that's really the basis for what I say is extreme deer habitat, is taking your woods and turning it into an old field type habitat. I visit lots of properties in Michigan and elsewhere in the Midwest and throughout the country. And the typical thing I see is a woods or woodlot that is useless for deer. It has canopy of trees. The trees are all grown up. They're growing too close together. It's not good for timber management, and it's not good for deer hunting. You can improve it by doing timber management. So if you do timber stand improvement and you thin out those trees, the woods will be thicker. But you will not have optimized that woods. If you want to optimize the woods, you're going to take out most of the large trees. You're going to hinge cut the understory, and you're going to create deer habitat, which means that you cannot see more than 20 or 30 yards through it in the dead of winter. That's the kind of woods that a deer wants to be in, especially a mature deer in hunting season. Hunters tend, and I tended to do this for many decades, they tend to want to be in a spot. They've got a rifle in their hands, let's say, or they've got a shotgun, and they can shoot that gun 70 to 200 or even 300 yards, and they want to be in a wide open spot where they can see to shoot those deer, and they think they'll see and shoot more deer if they do that. It's absolutely false, and if you're in a pressured area like Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin, you're probably not going to see any deer during hunting season if you put yourself in a spot where you can see that far. Or if you do see them, you're not going to see a mature deer. So we're really taking our property and creating as dense and thick a habitat as we possibly can, and that's an extreme deer habitat. There's nothing wrong whatsoever with somebody deciding that they want to manage their property for timber. But once they do that, they have to understand that they're not managing it optimally for deer. They may improve it for deer, they're not managing it optimally. So that's what I mean by extreme deer habitat. And I call it, you've got timber stand improvement, I call it extreme deer habitat improvement.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
So
when we do that, yeah, go ahead.
So I was going to say, I can definitely attest to what you just said about the things you're doing, because I was fortunate enough last spring to get to attend a QDMA event on your property where you actually gave us a tour of your hunting property. And myself and a friend that came with me, we were both amazed by the amount of work you had done in your timber. Just a tremendous number of projects that you did, and a lot of different things that went on in there. And it seemed, what kind of fascinated me the most was that it all seemed to be with a purpose. It didn't seem like you were going in there and cutting anything haphazardly. It seemed like you really looked at everything on your property strategically, and you thought about how all these different things would work together to achieve your goal.
Yes, I had a number of people walk that property with me, and I got ideas from as many people as I could, and we laid it out with a plan about exactly how we were going to make the deer move on that property.
So with that said then, Jim, to I guess start us off on this journey where I really want to go deep into all this, but can you take us to the very beginning in your case with your property, but let's talk about how this might be applicable to someone else that's listening right now. Maybe they have their own 40 acres. How do you start this process? You've got a blank slate essentially. How do you look at your property and then start making decisions? What do I do? How do I start?
Okay. So the property that you did the tour of, that is a 45-acre piece that we did the tour on, which is part of a larger 100. I bought 85 acres of that 130 in 2007. And when you would go out and hunt on that property, I could sit, there was a 25-acre crop field, and I could see typically every evening around an hour before dark, I would see 3 doe families come out into that field. And they would each be in a separate corner. And 2 of those doe families lived on my neighbor's property, and 1 of them lived on my property. But if I wanted to hunt those 3 doe families, I would have to penetrate my property hundreds of yards in. So I would be doing it like a traditional hunter does, which is to find out what the natural pattern of the deer is, and then set up in between the bedding areas and the food. And that's what hunters do when they go up in the national forest or state forest in northern Michigan, and they go out and scout, and they find out where the deer are bedding, and they find out where the deer are feeding, and they sit in between those areas. And if you're really good at it, you can move in on the bedding areas, and you can do all the things these expert hunters these skilled state land hunters like John, I'm having a mental block. He wrote the bow hunting for whitetails, but
John
having a mental block.
Eberhard.
Yeah. These expert hunters like John, they can go out and scout deer and then move in on them and kill them. And that's what you would have to do on a property like that, is to figure out where the deer are moving. So what did we do with that 45 acres? I bought an additional 45 acres. It had a wood and an old field next to the woods. And that woods was useless for deer hunting. You could see 300 yards through it. So we went and we decided we're going to create a situation where instead of having to scout the deer and figure out where they're coming onto the property, we're going to create a bedding situation on this 45 acres. And we're going to create a feeding situation on this 35 acres. And we're going to create transitional zones in between. And then we're going to try to harvest deer in between the bedding and food. So the first thing we had to do is go in and cut that wood. And I took timber out of that woods. I took about 75 logs out of it. And sold. I got good money for the black walnut, and I got almost nothing for the other trees, which were hard maples and soft maples and ash trees and that sort of thing. But we got all that cleared out, and then we went in and hinge cut it and created bedding areas in there. And I go into length. There's 3 chapters in my book about how to use a chainsaw to improve deer habitat and how to create those bedding areas. So we hinge cut that woods. And now we can house 3 to 5 doe families on that 45 acres instead of only hunting for 3 doe families that are spread out all over an 85-acre piece. We're taking them and concentrating them down and getting them to bed on that area by creating the habitat that they want to bed in. And that's just one little corner of the property. So that other 85 acres that I originally bought also has 3 other sections just like that, each of which have their own bedding, each of which have their own food sources, and each of which have ambush locations in between. But we are not going out and scouting the property and figuring out how to hunt it. We're telling the deer exactly where to bed, and then we're setting up on the exact paths that we know they're going to take the food. Because deer there's really only 3 things that deer do. They sleep, they eat, and for 1 day a year or 2 days a year, the does are interested in sex. The bucks are interested in sex for 3 or 4 months. But those are the only 3 things that are in their world. That's all they're interested in, is procreation, food, and bedding. And so if you understand those 3 things that are driving them, you can set your property up to get the deer to move exactly the way you want. So going into a woods like that, one of the things that a landowner has to think about, and this is why I caution people, unless you want to unless your main reason for owning the property is to grow trees, don't bring a forester in first. Because the forester is going to tell you that you want to preserve, for example, black walnuts on my property. I had veneer black walnut logs that I could get $300 to $500 for. If you want to do that and wait another 15 or 20 years for the next harvest, that's great. But you're not going to optimize deer habitat because a black walnut does zero for deer habitat. In fact, it's a negative. Black walnut, that most prized tree that I cut in my woods, is useless for deer habitat. In fact, it's a negative for deer habitat. And the reason for that is, one, if I'm going to grow a tree and get it to be big and tall and straight, it's going to have a big canopy and it's going to shade things out under it. The second thing is that it produces a toxin to other plants, a herbicide called juglone, which is released all around the drip line of the tree so that plants don't grow up very well underneath it. There are a lot of species that are suppressed. So the most prized tree in my woods for timber is the least prized tree for deer. Now, that forester will tell you, you know, you got some mulberries growing up here, you need to kill them. You got some basswoods growing here, you need to kill them. A variety of other trees that are not prized. Those are, basswood tree is golden candy to a deer. It's chocolate candy to a deer. There's nothing more I want in deer habitat than if I cut a basswood tree than to have basswood shoots growing up from the stump. But the forester's going to tell you to kill that because it's competing with the black walnuts or the white oaks or whatever other trees they prize. So the list of trees that you would make on your property that you want to propagate for timber is probably a completely different list of trees than you would want to propagate for deer. And it's the junk trees, for the most part, that we want for deer habitat. The box elder tree, the mulberry tree, the basswood tree. So when we go into that woods, we're thinking completely differently about it because I only own 130 acres there. I'm going to go in and take the timber out of that 12-acre woods, and that's the last time I'm ever going to grow timber in it because I prize deer more than I do timber. And so, we create that bedding area where we're optimizing. And now, if you look at that area, there are hundreds of basswoods growing in it. They've been growing there. The youngest basswood in that woods was probably 50 years old. And the reason is there were no deer 50 years ago in southern Michigan to speak of. They started growing up, in the 1960s. And once the deer population goes up, you can't grow a basswood tree. They love them too much. So they eat all those basswoods. When you come in and get rid of all the other trees that are shading things, now I have hundreds of basswood seedlings coming up in there, and I can feed those deer. I've taken that woods, which probably produced about 100 to 200 pounds of woody browse per year, and I'm now probably producing somewhere in the realm of 2,000 pounds per acre. So I've got 10 times as much food for the deer there. And it's food they badly need because the thing that's most lacking on these farms in southern Michigan is woody browse, which has to be close to 50% of a deer's diet. I'm providing that for them. My neighbors aren't. So to start with, that's the bedding part of the woods. We want to have a bedding area with lots of cover. The deer can't see more than 30 yards. They're safe in there. They're secure. We have lots of spots raked out for them to lay down in. And there's lots of browse in there because the doe family wants to be in a spot where the fawns can eat during the daytime. If they're in a barren spot that doesn't have any food, those fawns are going to get up and move away and try and find the nearest food. So we're providing lots of food, but it's not the highest quality food.
Now, Jim.
Yeah.
Quick,
sorry, if you pull the string on my back, I'll just keep talking.
No, I love it. I want to ask you a quick kind of follow-up question though before we leave this topic. Sure. When it comes to creating these really thick bedding areas that you're talking about here, there's a lot of different ways I've heard about doing this. You can hinge cut, you can clear cut, you can crush brush, you can selective harvest. What would you recommend the right option to be? Of all these different ways you can improve a timber stand, what's your improvement of choice?
Well, the biggest thing in states like Michigan and really over the last several hundred years has been clear cutting. Clear cutting is just a wonderful thing that you can do to improve deer habitat. And clear cutting and deforestation was responsible for creating the heyday of northern Michigan deer hunting, but not enough of it's being done today. Clear cutting is great, but when you clear cut and you remove everything, you have to wait 3 to 5 years to get regeneration of the understory. What you want to create, and what clear cutting, for example, creates, is an environment where 3 to 5 years later you have this 1,000 to 2,000 pounds per acre of woody browse, and you have all this cover. But it takes that long to do it. Hinge cutting is something that you can go into a woods that's open and park-like, and that night you can have provided bedding for deer by hinge cutting those trees because you're leaving the structure behind. The only difference between hinge cutting and clear cutting is that with hinge cutting, you're cutting the tree about 70% through the tree and getting it to fall over and keep it alive, and you're leaving that structure there. What you're doing, and Dr. James Kroll talks about this a lot, is moving the food from the top of the canopy 50 feet off the ground down to 5 feet and lower. And a number of these techniques will do it. Timber stand improvement, classical timber stand improvement, will improve the amount of food and cover in the understory. Hinge cutting will improve it infinitely more to the maximum amount that you can possibly do. Clear cutting will do the same thing, but the difference is you have to wait 3 to 5 years for clear cutting. And I've even seen areas in northern Michigan with high populations of deer up in northeast Michigan in the TB zone where people have clear cut 7 years ago, and the deer do not let the stuff reestablish. They come in the winter and chew it all back down to 3 or 4 inches. So you can do a clear cut and never, ever have it regenerate, depending on what the size of the population is. The difference with hinge cutting is you've tipped a tree over. It's still alive. It has a giant root system still feeding it, and it's bringing up nutrients from way down below the soil, and you have instant cover. So deer will come in. I swear, Mark, in the winter when we're hinge cutting, they hear the chainsaw running, and they're waiting to get in there. The record for doing a hinge cut in January was last year. We had deer yarding in the area, and from the time I stopped sawing and walked away, it was 6 minutes later that there were deer in there feeding.
Wow.
So if I skidded all those trees out in a clear cut, there wouldn't be anything there for the deer for the next couple of years. So on small properties where you have the small woodlots that we have here in southern Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, you name it, Iowa, the hinge cutting, I think, is usually going to benefit you more than either a TSI or a clear cutting will.
So, with that being the case, then, Jim, when it comes to hinge cutting, this is a topic that it's been getting talked about quite a bit the last 5 years or so, or maybe longer. And I've even tried it and had some success with it, but I know I could have done it better. You're a guy who I know has really become an expert on hinge cutting. You've given demonstrations and talked to numerous people about how best to do this. So, can you walk us through in detail how do you perform a perfect hinge cut?
Well, let me talk about the mistake that most people make. There are 2 or 3 major mistakes they make. People cut too far through the tree most of the time. What you want to do when you hinge cut is make a perfectly flat back cut. Go about 70% of the way through the tree, 80% maximum. Let's suppose a tree is leaning forwards, and let's suppose you have a 6-inch diameter tree and it's leaning forward. What people tend to do is cut into the tree and keep cutting until that tree starts to fall over. That's fine if you want the tree to break off and fall on the ground. But if you want the tree to remain intact, and by the way, I do those kind of cuts a lot. A lot of times I'll come into a woods and I'll just cut with the lean of the tree and let them fall over. And I don't care if the tree survives or not because I'm trying to get out the canopy or I have some other reason I'm trying to create a barrier zone or something like that. But if I want to preserve the tree, I'm not going to cut until it falls on its own. So that's the number one mistake. People want to make it easy for themselves. They want to cut through the tree and have it fall with its lean, and it falls over, and they go, boy, those darn maple trees just don't hold together. Well, yes, maple trees do hold together, even soft maples, silver maples, and things like that. But you have to stop before the tree falls on its own and make the tree go over. And so if I have a forward-leaning tree, I'm going to cut through until I know I'm just about to the point where that tree wants to release, and then I stop. And if that tree's leaning backwards, I do the same thing. And I have in my book illustrations of this where I cut into a tree, and the tree wants to fall back towards me. I stop cutting before it falls back towards me, and I'm going to get that tree to make a soft fall, and I'm going to do that one of two ways. Either using a wedge, and you can buy these wedges at Tractor Supply. You can buy them from Sherrill Tree. There are lots of sources for these plastic wedges. A plastic wedge will move the top of a 50-foot tall tree up to 12 feet, depending on the diameter of the tree. So a tree can be leaning back quite a bit, and you can move it and tip it over by using a wedge. In fact, almost every tree I cut, if I'm not sure that it has forward lean, it's going to get a wedge in behind my saw as soon as I can. If it's a smaller tree, we're going to cut about 70% of the way through. It's not going to fall over even if it's leaning forward. It's not going to fall back onto my saw if it's leaning back because I'm stopping soon enough and I'm using that wedge, or I'm using a very powerful tool called a hinge tool. And these are available here in Michigan from a couple of different sources. It's about, I don't remember how long it is, 12 foot or so long, 10, 12 feet long, and it's got a hook on one end that you can pull a tree over with, or it's got a reverse hook that you can push a tree over with, and that's how we're going to get the tree down. And by stopping, by stopping before the tree falls over on its own, we're leaving enough wood so that the tree is going to hold together when we push it over. It has a much higher probability of holding together. The other thing we are doing is we're always trying to get that tree to have a soft landing. If that tree falls all on its own and the top hits the ground, it propagates an energy wave and sends it back up the trunk and breaks loose the hinge. So we want it to fall, and we oftentimes land it on another tree that we've already cut, the top of the tree or the trunk, or we're brushing it down through smaller trees and getting it to fall as slowly as we can. So if you want your hinge to hold together, that's how you're going to accomplish that.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Okay. So kind of tying up things with hinge cutting here, I knew, or what I've seen you do when I toured the property was he used these hinge cuts and other improvements to actually make individual buck beds. It looked like or bedding areas on your property. Can you tell us why you make those individual beds, and then how do you specifically do that?
Well, we make the main focus is on doe beds. We want does to be bedding in the property. And let me just parenthetically talk about quality deer management. I think one of the greatest sorrows in hunting is that most hunting is taught by trophy hunters, and they have almost nothing to teach the average hunter that's going to walk back on his 40, 60, 100-acre property. They have almost nothing to teach because the techniques that they're using, the properties they're hunting on, have nothing to do with what the average guy. This average guy wants to walk back on his property and hunt, 8 or 10 or 12 times, and you have expert deer hunters that you've interviewed who say, I only hunt a spot 2 or 3 times because I know I'm going to wreck it and I'm going to move on to the next big buck in the next county or whatever. Guys like Dan Infalt, great hunters. But, the average guy did not scout out 30 different bucks all around the state of Wisconsin, and he's going to hunt one for 2 or 3 days, and then he's going to move to another county and hunt the other buck that he scouted in that other county because he's out there 200 days a year scouting. This guy wants to walk back in his property and hunt the same stand 8, 10, 12 times during gun season and still see deer. And so for that, you're not controlling the bucks, you're controlling the does. That I call quality deer hunting. We have quality deer management, but I haven't seen a lot of quality deer hunting taught. So a trophy hunter is hunting for bucks. The quality deer hunter is also hunting for bucks, but he's doing it by putting himself in a situation where he's controlling the doe movement on his property. And if you control the doe movement on your property, you're going to see bucks. So where a big buck hunter might go to my property, I have a creek bottom there, and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that those bucks are going to follow that creek during the rut for 1, 2, 3 miles. And if I sit down there and wait day after day, I might not see more than 1 or 2 deer a day, but eventually I'm going to see a big buck. Most people don't want to hunt like that. So what we're setting up is controlling the deer. So most of our bedding focus is on controlling the does. We want the does bedding. So that little woods you saw on my northeast quadrant, 45 acres, was managed to get 3 or 4 doe families living in that woods, and they do. On any given day I hunt there, I can expect to see 3 or 4 doe families leaving that in the afternoon. And let me just say, when I talk about this quality deer hunting, and I know you want me to talk about hinge cutting, but this is a really important topic. I'm hunting those doe families. I want to know exactly how they're moving out of there, and I want to control their movement. And what's going to happen is I'm putting the doe beds in there, and then I'm getting them to come out towards the food, and then the bucks are going to move perpendicular to the does to check out each doe family that's coming out. So we're really focusing on doe beds a lot more than we are buck beds. So I will go in and create, in an area like that, there are about 15 doe bedding spots in that 7 or 8 acre woods. It's about a 12-acre woods, but about 7 or 8 acres of it is dedicated to bedding. About 15 doe bedding spots in there. And that is going to house 2 or 3 or 4 doe families and several bucks, 2 or 3 or 4 bucks. And so we're making the doe beds as the focus. To make a single doe bed, if we have 15 doe beds, we're going to have 3 or 4 buck beds for each doe bed. And they're going to be in every direction. They might be down in heavier cover. They might be in this direction or that direction. But the doe beds are created by creating areas about 15 to 20 yards across where 7 or 8 or 9 spots are created under overhanging cover. So we're cutting these trees about 4 to 5 feet off the ground. The doe family areas must have at least 9 spots to lay down in, 7 to 9 spots, and the doe family is going to lay. Then we're going to make individual spots anywhere from 15 to 60 or 70 yards away in every direction where a buck could lay down alone. And we might, we don't worry about wind. We know the wind's going to blow from every direction in Michigan. It blows from the west most of the time, but the buck spots are individual spots. They have to be large enough. We rake out a spot. We pull down trees or we hinge cut trees over it and create a little dome-shaped area. It has 2 or 3 escape routes, just as the doe bedding areas do. And we're setting up a situation where we have both bucks and does bedding in that. That's a quality deer hunting situation. If you have a trophy deer hunting situation, you want to put your bucks some distance away and then hunt in between the bucks and the does. But we're doing a quality hunting situation where we're hunting between the does and the food, and the bucks are going to come. Okay. I'm sorry, I talked more about deer movement than I did, controlling the female part of the population than I did hinge cutting. So if you want me to go into more detail on that, I can.
No, that was good. I think you explained everything I was looking for plus more. So I love it. Now, you talked a little bit earlier about the fact that there's, the 3 things that deer care about: the bedding, the feeding, and the procreating.
Right.
We've talked a lot about the bedding, but when it comes to the feeding part, what are your main tools when it comes to providing quality food on your properties? I know you talked a little bit about providing woody browse through your timber improvement, but do you do anything with food plots or anything like that?
Yeah, and food plots are very important. So what we're going to do is we're going to hinge cut the bedding area, and you saw that. Then we hinge cut a transition zone in between. So we're going to hunt just inside the woods. And then we have this field next to the woods that was an old field overgrown with brush and trees and that sort of thing. And what we do is create little micro food plots in there. And these food plots are about 0.15 acres at the largest, down to about 0.5 acres, or 0.05 acres. So 1/20th of an acre. And we want 6 or 7 or 8 of those food plots adjacent to the transition area that the does are going to move into. And the more of those little food plots you have, the earlier the movement of the does out of the bedding area is going to be. So we have the hinge cut bedding area, we have less aggressively hinge cut transition area, and then we have these little feeding areas. And we make sure those feeding areas are completely surrounded by cover. So I call it 2 jumps to cover. The deer will use it earlier in the daytime if they feel like they can just take a jump or 2 and be in heavy cover. If we made one large food plot that, let's say, was 0.5 or 1 acres in size, they would not use it nearly as early. And that's a mistake that a lot of hunters make when they set up in an ag field, or they put a 2-acre food plot on their property and they wonder why the deer aren't coming out in daytime and using it. It's because those deer don't feel secure in there. So we want these little teeny food plots, and then because these does are highly competitive with each other, they will use it earlier in the day. So let's suppose instead of doing it this way, we had a bedding area and we had a single transition zone and then a larger food plot. And we hunted that single transition zone. People usually call it a funnel. So that's a funnel that deer traffic is going to come down through. Now I have 3 or 4 doe families in my woods, and they're all going to use that funnel. Well, guess what? They don't all use it at once. They're highly competitive with each other. So the first most dominant doe family might use it first, and the other does are going to hang back because they don't want to get the crap slapped out of them, which she's going to do if they come too close to her territory. So when you have a funnel situation, you can watch that, and hunters really like that because they go, oh, well, all the deer are going to come through here, so I'm going to see them all. Well, maybe you will and maybe you won't. Maybe they won't even make it out of there until after dark because they have to come out single file, and the bucks are going to be the last ones to follow them out. And when you have a funnel situation like that, a buck can stand in one spot and check out every single doe family. But we don't do that. What we have is these several little food plots strung out, and then we have a trail from the bedding area for each one of those food plots, and each one of those trails goes by a potential stand site. Now we're getting the does, they're no longer competing with each other. They each have their own route to take to their own food plot from the bedding area, and it forces buck movement because the bucks cannot stand in one spot and check out all the does. They have to move, and they move perpendicular to the does. So we set up buck trails in the transition zone that have licking branches all along them and scrapes all along them, and those bucks are going to continue to move back and forth perpendicular to the movement of the does. That's a quality deer hunting situation. So these what I call transitional food plots, I want to have a variety of foods in them. I will have perennials, like a mixture of, let's say, alfalfa, clover, and chicory. The next food plot might have Austrian winter peas and rye in it. The next food plot might have a mix of winter greens like brassicas and kales and maybe some winter wheat. The next food plot might have some crimson clover in it. And we're creating this variety of locations, variety of food, variety of trails to force the bucks to move to check out the does. The best way to pattern deer, or the time when you observe the most predictable patterning of deer is in this evening deer movement. So that's what I talk a lot about when I'm talking about transitioning from food to cover, is evening movement. And the thing about evening movement that I think most hunters don't understand is evening movement is controlled by fawns. Fawns are sitting in that bedding area. They're hungry, especially the buck fawn, and they're antsy, and they get up and they move, and they force the mom to eventually stand up and move, even though she may not feel comfortable doing so. So those, you see these doe families coming out of this area. The buck fawn pulls them out. Eventually, the mom follows, and the other group, the rest of the family group, and then the bucks are left back, and they're in the woods. And nothing smells good back, so they move out there and they start that perpendicular movement. That's what we're trying to set up. So we want quality food, and then if you go, you go into these transitional food plots. Now I have available for them a 1 to 2 acre food plot that they're going to move out into as dark approaches. And so you want the bedding, the transition zone, transitional food, moving out into a more shared destination plot. And that destination plot is more central on the farm, and it's shared by other bedding areas. So those deer will all meet up in the center of the farm. And unlike a lot of deer management people, I do not want the deer moving from this. I don't want a central sanctuary in most cases, and the deer moving out and getting more diffuse. I want the deer to be moving in the evening and becoming more concentrated on my property.
So we've got a pretty good blueprint here for how to create some solid bedding areas, and I feel like I've got a good understanding of how you're utilizing food now with the transitionary food, moving on to the larger central food sources, and how you like to space those out so you can force that buck movement. But I think the final piece of the equation then for me, if I'm trying to understand your philosophy here, is then how do I hunt this property the best way possible? If I'm hunting in a high hunting pressure situation, a small property, what do you think is the most important thing for a hunter to think about, or maybe what are some of the biggest mistakes that the average hunter is making in that kind of situation?
The number one mistake I always made, and the average hunter makes, is not paying attention to scent control. That's the number one thing. So if you have a 40-acre property, I can almost guarantee you that if you walk back to the back of that property into areas that where there's bedding and transition zones and funnels and that sort of thing, you're going to shut down your chances of seeing a mature buck indefinitely. And you're going to greatly curtail the number of deer that you're going to see indefinitely. I have an observation post from my barn. I have an absolutely superb deer habitat behind my house. It's just a 13-acre, it's 8 acres of deer habitat. And I observe how those deer behave as they come into the transitional food plots. From my barn window, I have lots of videos on my YouTube site that I call the Behind the Barn series, where I watch these deer in September and October. And I can tell you that I can walk back there in my full scent control, and I'm not going to, the next night the deer will be doing the same thing they were the night before. If I walk through those food plots without any scent control, I will shut down that food plot for daylight use for several days afterwards. Guaranteed.
So can you describe your scent control regimen then?
Well, it's the biggest chapter in my book. Even though the book was supposed to be about, using a chainsaw to shape your deer property, the most important chapter in the book is the scent control. And I go to great extremes in scent control. It starts out with it's really important attention to detail, understanding that your boots have to be absolutely pristine, because that's when you're going to get busted the most. Most deer hunters never see themselves get busted by a deer. When I used to sell scent control products, and I talked to thousands of hunters at shows, and I asked them about scent bust, and they always talk about deer stomping their feet and blowing and running. That is a rare scent bust, and if it happens to you, you probably have pretty bad scent control. The way you're getting busted 9 times out of 10 is from 200 to 300 yards away, and there's no blowing, and there's no stopping. The deer just picked you up, and they decided not to come in your direction. That's how it happens. And the other way it happens is you have your trail into your stand. They pick that trail up. They react very badly to such things in areas where they don't expect to see human footprints. And they will just alter their pattern of behavior. They don't shut down. They don't become nocturnal in most cases. They're just going to move in such a way that you can't see them anymore from that location that they know you're using. So extreme control of our boots, and we do that. The boots live 365 days a year in a bin. That bin is filled with activated carbon powder, which is the most powerful way that I know of to control scent. Every time I go hunting, I spray my boots. I laugh at these hunters I see on TV that do 2 or 3 little spritzes of their clothes with the scent sprays. It's ridiculous. They're not doing anything except selling scent spray. I hose my boots down with scent spray. 30 to 40 sprays per each boot until they're soaking wet all over, except on the inside, of course. And then I put them in a bin, and I put a couple of tablespoons of activated carbon powder in there, and I shake it up, and I now have a thin film of the most powerful scent control agent in the world on my boots. And my boots never get busted by deer. I watch deer walk across my trail all the time. The does, especially more mature does, will notice that there has been ground disturbance there, but they will not pick up human scent. Whereas if you just walk in without any scent control into a region that deer are not used to smelling humans, they will react for several days to that, and they'll avoid that location and work around it. So the boots are critically important. Clothing, any bit of clothing that touches my body is re-washed. That I have my own washer and dryer dedicated just to deer hunting. And by the way, that for guys that buy these $800 and $900 bows, you'd be a lot better off with a 200-pound bow and a washing machine that doesn't have your wife's scented detergents in it. I have gone for 6 months using a washing machine, changing over from scented to unscented detergents, and I could still smell the scented detergents in it after 6 months of hundreds of washes. You just can't, in a front-loading washer like mine, you just can't get rid of that odor. You'd have to tear the whole machine apart. So having a dedicated washer and dryer is really important, and there are a lot of ways you can do that. I bought mine for less than $500 from the Sears Dented store. I have a room in my barn that it's in that's heated, but you can put it in your garage like my friend Tony Smith does, roll it out, hook a hose to it, and do all your wash. There's lots of ways to accomplish that, but using the family washer is a great way to shut down deer activity around your stand. Then the use of activated carbon and zeolite powder, which is a volcanic powder that, like activated carbon, is very powerful at taking up scents. We use that in our clothing, on our skin, groin area, gets the zeolite powder, armpits, an extreme shower. I do all this stuff, Mark, and people always say, why would I want to go through all that? And I say to people, what if I could guarantee you, it takes me about an extra 45 minutes to an hour to get ready over what it used to without scent control in the morning or in the evening. So what if I could guarantee you that your hunting for the season would be 5 to 10 times better? You would see more mature deer. You would see 5 to 10 times more deer, no matter what your situation is. If you only see 1 deer a day, you might see 5 deer a day. If you see 20 deer a day, you might see 100. What if I could guarantee you that? Would you come to my house and do 45 minutes of work if I could guarantee you 5 times better hunting? And the answer always is yes. I said, well, why aren't you willing to do that to get ready for your own hunt? Because that's what will happen. And it isn't that on any given hunt you're going to walk out in the woods and see 5 times as many deer. The loss of deer sightings, and this is just classic for a state like Michigan, and I went through it for decades of doing, hunting rather stupidly, I would say, that you're shutting down the deer hunting. Day 1, you'll see a number of deer. Day 2, it slows down. Day 3, you're not seeing anything more. Day 4, you're sitting in the coffee shop with your buddies saying the DNR is killing too many does or the deer have all gone nocturnal. Well, you've caused all that. The hunter causes all that. So when I talk about 5 to 10 times better, I'm talking about whatever hunting you had on November 15th, you're still going to have on November 30th if you do the extreme set control, because the deer are not going to be aware that you're hunting them. There are other things that go into this, Mark, like stand approach and all that sort of thing. But the set control is the main thing that is going to make the difference. So that I keep very careful records of how many bucks, does, fawns, etc. I see per hour. And I see twice as many bucks per hour in December as I do in October. Every year in and year out. And that's mainly because of my set control. And so half the bucks have been killed off. But I'm seeing twice as many. What's causing that? My neighbors are using poor set control, and the deer are dumping into areas where they don't feel that they're being hunted or they don't feel there's a human presence. So this just makes an absolute world of difference. It isn't a small difference. It's a huge difference once you decide that you're going to start doing it.
Yeah, well, I certainly can't argue with that at all. That makes, like you said, a monumental difference when you start taking scent control into account and really take it seriously. It's going to make all the difference in the world. So, Jim, we are coming up here on time, and you've shared really a tremendous amount of knowledge here, almost overwhelming. So much stuff that I know that I'm personally going to have to go back and look at your book to kind of recant some of these things in my own mind. But for others out there who want to learn more about these different philosophies that you've talked about and some of your different strategies, where can they go to learn more or to buy your book?
Yeah, the book can be bought at my website, www.extremedeerhabitat.com. You can also reach it at www.hingecut.com. That's easier to remember. And then there is a buy the book tab that you can hit, and it is $19.99 for the book. It is an electronic book. A lot of people don't care for electronic books, but I will probably never do a print version of this book, because by making an electronic book, I have over 480 color illustrations in it. I have 48 videos that you can click on. So if I'm showing a chainsaw technique and you don't quite get it, click on the video and you can instantly watch the video. So I wouldn't be able to do this. This is a real multimedia experience. I hope that those of your listeners that have never done an ebook, well, yes, you have. You've done a PDF. Everybody's looked at PDF documents. That's all this is. It's a clickable PDF document. You download it onto your computer, and then you can click on the links, and it's just a lot of people have talked to me about being afraid of e-books before, but it's a great experience.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to that. I've personally had a lot of experience with them, and once you get them figured out and get them on your device, they are awesome to work with. So
awesome, yeah. And it's the future. Yeah. I think 10 years from now there will be no such thing as print books for how-to stuff. Like my book is showing you how to do things, and for that you need the illustrations, you need the videos, and all that sort of thing. And this is the direction the world textbook is going as well.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I will make sure to include links to your website and the book on our show notes page. So for everyone listening, if you go to wiredtohunt.com/episode 53, you'll also be able to get those links that you can click on straight to Jim's site. So, Jim, thank you so much for your time. This has been incredible.
Thank you for your interest, Mark, and look forward to talking to you in the future.
Sounds great. Have a great night.
I'll see you at the QDMA National Convention next week.
Looking forward to it, Jim.
Okay, man. Take
Bye-bye.
care.
All right, that is going to be it for us today on the show. So before we close things out, though, a big thank you to the companies that are keeping the Wired to Hunt podcast alive. If you enjoy the show, please support these companies, as we wouldn't be here if they didn't help us out. So big thank you to Sitka Gear, Trophy Ridge, Bear Archery, Redneck Blinds, Huntera Maps, Ozonics, Carbon Express, Lacrosse Boots, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. And of course, thank you for spending the last hour with us. I appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. So until next time, have a great rest of your week, get outside, and stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. You simply pour a can into your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. So pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.